Hey there, folks. Jordan Chariton, live in Flint, Michigan, which is second home to me, and I've been embraced by some people here. I'm delighted to be joined by former Mayor Karen Weaver, who was mayor here 2015, really when the... folks. Jordan Chariton, live in Flint, Michigan, which is second home to me, and I've been embraced by some people here. I'm
That's true.
To be joined by former Mayor Karen Weaver. I want that open so I could, read your questions and comments for later. So you became mayor in 2015 here, which was basically right after then Governor Snyder finally acknowledged, the water's toxic. So you came in here. It had already really been a crisis, but when the media finally started covering it, and you were mayor until 2019?
Correct.
Narrowly lost in 2019 to the current mayor. I think it was by 200 votes.
Correct.
And
or so they say.
And this last go around, listen, we'll talk about this a little bit later. I am certainly not an election conspiracist. I do not believe any of Trump and that kind of bullshit. But something doesn't smell right here, and we'll get into that because really barely lost in 2019, 200 votes. I can't find anyone in Flint that likes the current mayor, but somehow he defeated you by 1,000.
And, that math adds up about as much as the math in the settlement adds up.
Right.
It doesn't add up.
But I want to first start with, I want to share something and get your response because I won't get into such details, but a filmmaker contacted me recently, had done some popular documentaries, and I guess he read one of my stories on Flint, and he was kind of curious because he thought it was all solved by the media reports and some of the stuff he had seen, and he read some of my stuff and was curious because it seems like what he thought is not the case. So I said, how much time you have? So we scheduled an hour call. 3 hours later, he said at the end, this makes Watergate look like child's play.
Exactly.
This is the biggest cover-up. He said, if everything you're saying is true, and I said, I haven't had to correct anything yet. This is the biggest cover-up I've ever heard of. We're now 9 years and 1 day. I think it's day 3,288. Every time I come here, this is my 19th trip. You see less people out. Part of that is because people have passed, unfortunately. Other parts of people are sick, and other parts of people are just losing hope. But I wanted to just ask you your initial thoughts 9 years later. There was an event yesterday, and people are still fighting. But one activist, Claire McClinton, told me, actually this year it's worse than it was last year because you haven't gotten a dime from the settlement.
Right.
The few remaining water stations that were left open, which was at churches, they shut down earlier this year. And it's still very much a crisis that's not being treated that way.
It's still very much a crisis. So let me just say thank you to you for coming 19 times and covering this story. But the person that you spoke with that thought things were great, that's a lot of people think that because the stories have gone away. The attention has gone away. The media some media, mainstream media has gone away, and they're not covering it because this is the story that needed to go away. Because you said it right. This is Watergate right here in Flint, if you want to talk about a real one. And so I've been going around as well talking with people because I want them to know Flint has not gotten through this crisis. We are still operating in crisis mode, and it's really sad because when you think about it, when I was in office, we talked about going from crisis to recovery because we were giving hope. We were doing what needed to be done and getting those pipes changed and getting services here for the people of Flint and getting supports and talking about this and making things happen. But for the pipes to not be finished, and we were a year ahead of schedule, that can make you feel pretty hopeless. For people's lawns to not be completed. And this is 9 years later. for us not to have the water available to us, for people's in-home plumbing and fixtures and appliances to not be addressed. And we're starting to see more and more of the fallout, whether you talk about physically, mentally, emotionally, from this water crisis. So it does take away hope, especially when you have people that are in office that aren't speaking up about this and aren't fighting with us, because they should be on the streets fighting with us and talking to those other people in those places and holding them accountable. And you don't see it happen. And you brought something else up that will make you not have hope, Jordan. I mean, you talked about the settlement. And it was funny because I was in Jackson, Mississippi.
Just so the audience knows, the settlement is $626 million. Might sound like a lot, but I think $200 million go to the lawyers.
Correct.
So when you break it
down, it's not much. And I was there, and this was the end of March, the last week of March, and I got a call because they were talking about the settlement and saying we've got some more issues with the settlement, and so people probably won't get any money until maybe the end of the year. What do I think? I think the same thing I thought before. You know, this is not a surprise. And I said, you know, maybe I've become jaded because none of this is surprising. These were the things that we knew would happen, especially if we didn't have those that are supposed to be speaking up for us doing that. So you haven't gotten any money. You've seen the conditions get worse. Like I said, we've looked at what's going on in our school system with our special education rates, the need for those mental health services, the young people that are involved in the juvenile justice system. You know, we're starting to get information around the cancer cluster and what's going on with that, with those elevated numbers. So it'll give you no hope. And when no one has been held accountable for the crime that has taken place here, it's a wonder we're still fighting. But we haven't gone away, and we haven't given up. And you've met us. You know us. You know us now because you've been here so many times. You know we're not going to go away quietly. And it's funny because I remember being in Jackson, and I was saying one of the reasons I always said pay attention to Flint, and Flint needed to be under a national spotlight, because I said if they can do this to us under a national spotlight, then think of what they'll do to you. I said coming soon to a neighborhood near you. And so now we're in Jackson talking about the same things. And you want to hear something scary? I was there. I was on a panel with the National Association of Black Journalists, and there was a guy, and it's bad I don't remember his name, but he's from the EPA, and he says, oh, it's my friend Karen Weaver. I'm thinking, no, we're not friends. I mean, you know we're not friends. Come on. And he's telling them the same thing we were told in Flint about the standards that the water meets. And I'm thinking, you know, I mean, really? You know,
just like they're telling, the EPA's telling the people of East Palestine.
I was going to say, we can talk about East Palestine. Exactly.
Don't believe your rashes. Don't believe your bloody noses, right. Your burning eyes.
It's all a figment of your imagination. And for this man to sit there and say that, and I'm thinking, you said this to us. And it was funny because a lady came up. It was so reminiscent of Flint. She came up with 2 bottles of water, and one was a bottle of new water that hadn't been opened, and one was from her tap. And she said, you're going to tell me that these 2 bottles of water look alike? And he said, I really can't tell.
Well, that's a good place to start.
Okay.
Because I want this interview to be, basically this whole thing has been swept under the rug, so let's lift that rug right up.
Let's lift it up. Let's
start with the water. As Erin Brockovich has said, and not to name drop, but I trust what she says, the levels of concern that the EPA put out there are about as credible as, about a claim by President Trump. The EPA says certain parts per billion of lead is acceptable. They're saying the same thing about vinyl chloride and other things in East Palestine. I talked to residents. We're talking 9 years later.
9 years later.
It was Governor Snyder 5 years ago declared the water was restored based on manipulated water testing, which we broke that story. So that was 5 years ago. So the media has basically been reporting, as of 5 years ago, everything's back to normal here. But I talked to residents. They're telling me their water smells like a sewer.
Mm-hmm.
They're telling me that in some places little black particles are coming out into the water. Some tell me that in the shower they're still getting rashes or hairs falling out. You hear different things in different parts of town. The water can be different based
Right,
on
exactly.
based on chlorine levels, or some areas have a lot of abandoned homes, so water's kind of stagnant. But you hear from enough people, and I always tell journalists, I mean, Politico wrote a story, Flint's water is safe. Why doesn't anyone trust it? Do you think that reporter ever came to Flint?
Right.
I doubt it.
Right.
You talk to enough residents, you hear this is not, yes, there's a trust issue, but there's also an issue with the water.
There's also an issue with the water, and there's an issue when we talk about trust. You haven't completed the pipe replacement. What do you think is going to happen when you're leaving these old lead and galvanized pipes in the ground? And they still go to people's homes. What do you think is going to happen when you haven't addressed in-home infrastructure? We're talking about plumbing, appliances, fixtures. What do you think is going to happen? And it was during, maybe the end of the summer, our lead levels were going back up. And in fact, I was walking in the 6th Ward. Tanya Burns was walking with me. Art Woodson was walking. We were letting people know the lead levels over here are going back up. And that was an area where we had some more cases of Legionnaires come up. So why should anybody trust?
And also, I don't think a lot of people realize this because the media really only discussed the lead service lines. Service lines are the pipes from your curb that go into your home. But they said that the main pipes that ran underneath the street, they never were replacing those. And residents tell me the main pipes, the mains, are bursting at record numbers all over the city. You told me years ago that when you were mayor, you had gone to the governor and said, we need money from the state to address people's corroded interior plumbing.
Yes.
And what did
we
she
were
tell
promised. We were promised, and at this point, when I went to the governor, Snyder was in office first, and then it switched. So it still never got completed. So we were first promised new fixtures, but a limited quantity. We were told we would get 12,000 new fixtures, and it would be over 3 years, so it would be 4,000 a year. And so we said, well, okay, there's more than 12,000 homes that need this, but it's a start. It's a start. Well, we didn't even get that. We didn't get that. We got it for 1 year. It was one and done. And we never got the rest of those. And that was something that I've always talked about, and I had that conversation with both governors, with Governor Snyder and with Governor Whitmer, because if you want people to start trusting, you have to address that, because even if the water was testing good, Jordan, let's say, because in some areas, maybe it did, and you've changed my outside pipe,
service line, yeah.
The service line. But I have old, corroded interior infrastructure. What does that give me? Bad water.
Yeah. Because stuff's going to be dislodging off the pipes.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that's what we have always talked about. So to hear what's going on isn't a surprise. It's what we expected if this didn't get completely addressed. And it hasn't.
Right.
And it hasn't, and it's maddening, because I remember even when we were having that meeting, and Region 5, EPA was here, and we're in Region 5 in Michigan, and they're headquartered out of Chicago, and they were here, and we said, well, where's the media? Where's the media? There was, how can we be having these issues with levels going back up and people getting Legionnaires, and there's no one here to cover it? And so, and I can't remember which TV station around here, a media person finally came, and they started asking us for data and documentation. I said, you already have it. Unless you want this new data and documentation, Flint has not been made whole. You know what's going on in Flint. So don't play with us. So, we said, let's get out of here. So we get out because we realize this is just, show and tell. We get outside of the building, and the lady from the media is outside. And we said, are you going to talk about this story at all? And she said, no, we've been called to cover a story about a dog.
About a dog?
A D-O-G.
Did the dog have superpowers that was more important than...
we were just like, what? It never got covered. as so many things don't get covered here in the city of Flint.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that. I mentioned this before we went live, and the audience will see this. We did an interview before this live stream. We recorded it. And I was interviewing a married couple, and the husband had Legionnaires in 2021. So we're not talking about 2014 and 2015 when there was the largest outbreak of Legionnaires in American history in Flint. We're talking about in 2021. He was hospitalized in July. Legionnaires, which is waterborne. It has some of the traits of pneumonia, but it's not pneumonia.
Right.
It comes from bacteria in water, and it thrives in the hot summer months. So he had it in July.
When we were going out. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We were going door to door, letting people know this. But
Right.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
And long story short, most of the time they think exposure comes from cooling systems like air conditioners, but they were not using their air conditioner because they couldn't afford it. So the husband was taking 4 showers a day just to cool off, and he was in those showers, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and he got Legionnaires. So the CDC was contacted, I guess, from the hospital because they're supposed to be told when there's Legionnaires cases. The CDC calls this gentleman. And he tells them, yeah, no, we weren't using the air conditioner, and I've been showering 4 times. Clearly, he got it from the shower, and they never followed up. It was almost like as soon as he told them that, they hung up, and that was that. I'm learning some things about the CDC in East Palestine because they're not testing for vinyl chloride, which was detonated from that train. They're actually telling healthcare providers not to test residents. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying never trust the government. But how is it that in 2021, this gentleman is telling them, yeah, we're not using air conditioning.
Right.
You would think there'd be some type of investigation.
Right.
You'd want to trace, are we having an increasing case of pneumonia? But nothing. And that just kind of...
They want this story gone. They want this gone. And that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line, and that's always been the problem here in Flint.
Well, for those that might not be familiar with our previous discussions, you could tell people, I mean, when you were mayor, there were not only Governor Snyder's office, but local business types here that were trying to push you to declare the water was fine.
And that was their issue with me. That was their challenge with me, let me say, because I wouldn't do it. And they said, I was I was being disruptive to business. I said, no, fix it. I'm tired of talking about water. Don't you think I want to talk about other things? But if you don't fix this, I'm going to stay right here on this water. Something that's a basic human right. But that was what they wanted me to do. I remember when I first got in office, one of the first press conferences I had, and this is still when the manager was here, Natasha, and our first council was in place. And so this was early on, and they wanted me to say it meets MDEQ standards. I said, I'm not saying it. I said, you can say it if you want to, but I'll never say that. And I was not going to say the water was fine because we knew it wasn't. We knew it wasn't. So how was I couldn't believe people would ask me to do that. We need this to go away. We need to bring people in. And what I appreciated was as other businesses and developers saw, oh no, they're really addressing this water because we were taking care of it. They wanted to come here. They were starting to come. So it's like if you finish what we started, you wouldn't have this challenge. But to sit here and lie to the people again, because that's what it is. It's just not true. And it would have been so much easier to finish the pipe replacement, to get people their in-homes addressed. For $100 a day, Jordan, come on. Corrosion control, $100 a day, and we weren't worth it, and look what it has cost us.
Well, a lot of people don't realize, because the media has simply reported, the narrative has been, oh, they just chose not to add the right chemicals into the water. The plant didn't even have the equipment in the plant to add the corrosion control chemicals.
Right.
Documents that I obtained showed, literally this plant was like the equivalent of getting on a plane with one of the wings shaking.
Wow.
That's what the Flint water plant was. Not because of these workers, but because this plant for decades was a backup plant. it only operated as a full-time plant for 30 days out of the year. So basically, a year before the water switch, the emergency manager, which is basically a puppet for former Governor Rick Snyder, is telling the workers, get this baby up and running for a year from now. And it wasn't only Mike Glasgow. He's been mentioned in the media. There were other plant workers telling them, we don't have enough equipment. We don't have the right equipment. Our systems are outdated. We're understaffed. I was told that they were hiring workers at the plant to help expedite the plant that were workers from Walmart, no disrespect, but did not have water experience.
Background or expertise.
So essentially it's like flying a plane off the runway with a missing wing.
Right.
And the thing is, they, time after time after time with this story, so much has been invested in almost like PR to declare it over and look at the cultural center that's been opened downtown and this and that. But the residents here, you mentioned cancer cluster. I saw a media headline. I almost lost my mind. There was a media headline, I don't remember if it was a local Flint outlet, that said Flint has a cancer cluster. Could it be because of the water? No, it's because of the weather.
Right.
So
Could
Flint,
it be a lot? Yeah.
Tell people Flint right now has a cancer cluster. I speak with residents. They tell me there's a lot of people, not relatively young, 40s, 50s,
Exactly.
60s,
These are young people
dying of cancer, and they don't necessarily have any family history of these cancers.
And let me add this to it. It was no thanks to the elected officials that are representing us. This was a grassroots that did this. That was one of the things, and we had started working on it when we were in office. It was really interesting. I had this conversation just yesterday with Pamela Pugh, who was our chief public health advisor at the time, and Arthur Woodson. And he was talking about the information she was gathering for the cancer cluster study and everything they had been talking about and what needed to happen. And so we were working on it then. And so that was something that he and other activists continued after we were out of office and went to Washington and met with them at the White House. And that was how this came about. And that's why I said, we're doing things ourselves. We're taking matters into our own hands because we don't have those in the places that are supposed to be doing this for us. And so that's what's made this so hard, such a hard fight is, like I said earlier, when those that are elected to be your voice and represent you and speak up and fight for you don't do it, people think everything is okay in Flint. Nobody's hollering about Flint, but the residents still are. And we're going to continue to do that. Now,
elephant in the room, you're a Democrat, so I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but I'm going to get you in trouble.
Oh, wow. He's going to get, okay, here we go.
Listen, there was a lot of Flint residents. I'm not a Flint resident, but I at least was a little hopeful. All right, Snyder's gone. Obviously, nobody trusted Snyder here. You got Whitmer coming in. She talked, I'm going to reopen the water stations that provided free bottled water. She ran on that in 2018. She did not do that. Claire McClinton yesterday told me that the few churches that were still providing bottled water, that shut down earlier this year. I know she's come to Flint, maybe like a park opening or something like that. But as far as the water crisis, she's done next to nothing. And then you have the Attorney General of Michigan. Well, let's just start with Whitmer. I know that there was a kidnapping plot. Obviously, she dealt with COVID and overseeing that in the state. We understand Flint's not the only thing under her purview. But I can't tell what she has done for Flint in terms of resources, water, the childhood issues, lobbying the federal government for more. So correct me if I'm wrong if she's done more, but the people I speak with here are not overly impressed.
Okay. I'm not correcting you on anything. I'm not correcting you on anything because, like I said, this was the story that needed to go away.
Yeah.
And we have been let down and disappointed by those in those seats that said, that have made empty promises to the residents of the city of Flint. And that's why when you said people seem to have lost some of their hope, this is why. Because you think, okay, here comes some more hope and some more help. And, you know, that's exciting because even under the Republican administration, we were making things happen. You know, I mean, people saw new pipes going into the ground. They saw people from Flint getting jobs. I mean, things were, we were bringing playgrounds in, got new housing for people that had lived in a public housing that had been built on a floodplain for 50 years. We finally got them out of that environmental hazardous living condition. So you were starting to see things happen. We were getting filtration systems for the schools. So it was just like, wow, this can happen. And now that we have, you know, because this is a majority Democrat city, you know, everybody's not a Democrat here, but it's a majority Democrat city, I think people were excited. People were even more hopeful about the future. And nothing has panned out. Nothing has panned out.
Because it seems to me, just my opinion, that Governor Whitmer and the Attorney General, their major focus was on getting this civil settlement done at the lowest possible dollar amount. I've talked to people that said Flint should have gotten between $1.5 and $2 billion. Well, they got down to $600 million.
That's where I said we should start.
Right.
I said we need to be starting at $1.5 billion. I was asked to take that statement back, and I said I will not take that statement back. That's where that should have been, and then we're told this is the floor and not the ceiling. No, the floor has fallen in. We're in the basement. Really, maybe we're in a cellar underneath the ground.
Because it's really $400 million
Exactly.
once you take out the legal expenses.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That no one has gotten yet. And you said it. I mean, some people have died. Some people have died that are caregivers for these children. And they weren't able to get that money to help them while that person was here. So it's easy to give up hope when it's like one thing after another, one insult after another has happened. And then you think about it. We were already poisoned by our water system, immune systems already compromised, and then here comes COVID. I mean,
yeah, Melissa Mays, who's a top activist, she told me something. I looked into it, and it's accurate. At one point, Flint had the highest positive COVID rate on planet Earth.
But we were told we didn't have it. It wasn't even in Flint. And I kept saying, you know, I remember coming home from New York being sick, having COVID. They said, we don't have COVID here. I said, okay, but you got a case. It was in Washington State and in New York. I've been in New York for the last month. And guess what? I wasn't on the plane by myself. People were flying in from Washington State and New York all the time. So how can we not have it? And we knew that our numbers were higher because we were going through a water crisis. Like I said, we had already been compromised. So we didn't have that fight in us. Some of it had been taken away from our bodies because of what we were still dealing with physically and mentally. And we're still going through it. We're still going through it.
And I think that's important because I try to impress the. By the way, if I didn't say, smash the like button right under the video, share this stream.
Please.
Let's get it out to more people. I think something people need to realize, because the media really only focuses on things if there's a high death number. I mean, you look at school shootings, if 3 people died, they'll cover it for an hour and move on. But if like 10 or so, then you'll get a few days. But I think what people need to realize, there's really no way to accurately quantify how many people have died here.
Thank you.
Because in my view, they did not have a health registry initially. People have died of cancers for which they had no family history, and these were healthy people before. Sure, anyone could get cancer, but you have this rise.
This number.
Right. And then you have COVID, where maybe without their
maybe some of those people would not have died. They would still be here. You talked about Legionnaires. And then there were people with, you remember our pneumonia rates went up, and they wouldn't say it was because of the water, but we knew it was. And they died. They weren't in that count. They were not in that count. When you talk about the number of stillbirths and miscarriages that went up, that wasn't in the count for the water, because at that point, when it was happening, they were saying, oh, you know, nothing was attributed to the water because the water was good. So I agree with you. There's no way to say how many people we have lost as a result of this water, how many have been damaged, because it's still playing out.
And how many people you will lose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can you kind of talk about, for people not from here and they don't hear about Flint anymore because the media, focuses on other things. I mean, the city was not necessarily booming before the water crisis. We know for a lot of reasons, jobs being sent to other countries, racist housing laws, the tax base leaving through white flight. Flint was not doing well.
Right.
But a couple years later, every time I come back, unfortunately, it seems like it, other than downtown, which has been made very nice, it seems like it's really, I don't want to say falling apart, but it looks like it's basically just been forgotten through lack of investment outside of the downtown area. There's some programs that were provided by the federal government and this and that, but people I talk to, they just feel, they feel like they're trying to kill us off.
Right.
Can you kind of talk about the psyche here?
I mean, it's funny why you should feel forgotten. We do feel forgotten. I remember when I was running this last time, and I was at a stoplight, and this guy rolled down his window, and he said, "I'm voting for you because you won't forget us." He said, because we feel forgotten. And I thought, I mean, that just, to say that. So now if grown-ups are feeling that way, what are kids thinking? What are they feeling? I had put this PowerPoint together where I was showing some of the things going on in Flint. And one of the things I showed was when the children were protesting. I said, what does that tell a young person about their value, about their worth, when they know there's something wrong with our water and they're telling us everything is fine? I know what my skin feels like and what it looks like. I know I used to have more hair than this. I know. They know. And so what does it do to your psyche when you're devalued? I mean, you're just devalued. So we do feel forgotten. Many of us feel that way.
And I also think, and this is not a thing on, it's not to get in a debate about Russia for Ukraine, but I just look at it from a common sense perspective. People must be sitting here, wait a minute, I'm seeing every day Biden announced we're sending another $1 billion to Ukraine, another $1 billion.
And we can't get Flint fixed.
Like, even if you support that, why is it we have these laws?
And that's what we're saying. We're not saying don't support that, but take care of home, especially when you had a hand in it. Right. Especially when you had a hand in it. Take care. I remember, and this was during the when we had that objection period, and I filed because I wasn't trying to get any money. I didn't do any of the paperwork to get any money because I'm not trying to. I filed because I wanted to go on record and talk about the injustice here. But the EPA was here, and they were here because they wanted to take lessons learned from Flint, the good lessons learned from Flint. And I thought, wow, really? First, your timing sucks. And you want to take lessons learned, but you don't want to complete the job of fixing Flint and making us whole. And so when I'd hear them say, prevent another Flint, period. And I'm like, why isn't there a comma? And you say, and let's fix Flint.
Well, it's part of that almost like reverse psychology that they're trying to do, not just the EPA, to make it seem like it's in the past.
Right.
Lessons learned
exactly.
implies that this is a tragedy from the past, not an ongoing crisis.
Yeah. And it is an ongoing crisis. And that's why I've been so busy, really, because I want people to know that this is an ongoing crisis. And like I said before, if they'll do this to us, think of what will happen with you. And we were under a national spotlight. It was like a microscope, everybody was looking at Flint. And so naturally, most people think we're in such a better place because, oh, you all got this money. They heard that there were charges coming. The pipes must be completed. Things have to be better in Flint. And then you have people like yourself that come back that have been here and seen Flint over some years say, what is going on? This doesn't make any sense.
Right. Let's speak of those charges. And I'm going to try not to be long-winded, but I just want to outline this because I don't think people truly get the staggering level of things that happen here in terms of a criminal cover-up. I think it gets lost because people are just like, we knew it was corrupt. This is a different type of corrupt. there's political corruption, and then there's the type of corruption that you would knowingly take action knowing people are going to die as a result. That's not your average political corruption. I just want to outline the things that Status Coup and I have broke, yet no one is in prison. Let's start with the beginning. Number one, the governor and his environmental department manipulated the water testing, which is a federal crime. It's a violation of federal regulations. They were going into people's homes and flushing their water right before taking tests. Running their water right before putting the sample bottle in, that's against EPA regulations. And that is the data, that manipulated data, that Governor Snyder in 2018 used to declare the problem over. Then you have the governor's top advisor, Richard Baird, who you had some run-ins with. He was going around Flint, targeting certain residents and activists who had gotten a little too loud, who had gotten media attention because they popped off at town halls and this and that. And all of a sudden, he would show up and offer them, the state's going to pay for your medical care. But shh, you can't tell anyone who's paying, and maybe quiet down a bit. Don't be so. Basically trying to pay off residents. I actually provided that evidence to the current Attorney General's team, and that was part of the charges against him. He was charged with obstruction of justice, extortion, misconduct in office, and perjury. And one of the charges had to do with him going around offering payoffs. So we got basically the governor's consigliere, if you want to think mafia, going around offering payoffs. Then you have prosecutors obtain the phone records of Governor Snyder and his top officials, and they found just a mad dash of phone calls all over 2 days in October 2014. That might not sound significant. We're talking 6 months after the water switch. We're talking 2 weeks before Snyder's up for re-election as governor. And we're talking the same period in October 2014 when the health department, the environmental department are trading phone calls and emails, worried about the increase in Legionnaires. So prosecutors concluded the governor, his chief of staff, the head of the health department, and some others were actively trying to stop the outbreak from going public, from the residents finding out. Then you have, we broke, and this took a lot of time to break these stories and a lot of documents and a lot of hard work. We broke that some of the governor's top officials suddenly deleted their phones right before the launch of the Flint criminal investigation. Their messages were erased. Some phones were just completely wiped right before the launch of the investigation. Finally, we broke that the original investigation was building a massive racketeering case, RICO.
Right,
so
RICO.
some of you crime buffs, that's what they use. That RICO was actually created into law to go after the mafia back in the 70s. And they were going to charge several officials, I know some of them, I haven't reported it yet, with racketeering based on a financial scheme that allowed Flint to join a brand new water pipeline that was completely unnecessary and basically indebted Flint further. I jot all these down because any one of these things is enough that somebody would go to jail, but when you spin them all into a web...
No one goes.
So the Attorney General of Michigan, Dana Nessel, I don't care if she's a Democrat, Republican, or whatever, she's a Democrat, she gets in. Before she got in, as a candidate, she was bashing the investigation.
Yes.
Not the original investigation. This was started in 2016. The original team went till 2019. I doubt they were perfect, but seemed like there was momentum. They had successfully gotten a judge to rule that 2 of the top health officials had to face jury trial for involuntary manslaughter. She came in. I didn't really understand the reason. She said they were incompetent. She fires all of them.
Yes.
She restarted from scratch.
Yes.
She sent her new prosecutors to Flint to basically throw the previous people under the bus and say they were incompetent. They drop all the charges. Then they recharge a lot of those same officials a year and a half later. Some of the people she recharged, she charges them with lesser crimes. Gone were the financial crimes. She didn't recharge them with financial crimes. And then last year, the Michigan Supreme Court threw out the charges, saying that they violated the Constitution of the state.
That one-man jury, the grand jury.
I don't know.
How do you not know that? I mean, how do you, as an attorney, an experienced attorney, not know that this is unconstitutional? How do you not know that?
And this wasn't a partisan decision. This was 7-0 both conservative-leaning judges, liberal-leaning judges, 7-0. And I contacted the Attorney General's office the other day, and I simply asked, you say there's an ongoing investigation. Can you specify how? Because the Michigan Supreme Court tossed out the charges. You appealed. You lost the appeal. The statute of limitations for felony charges is 6 years in Michigan. So most of these charges have already passed the statute.
Right.
The only one still in play is involuntary manslaughter, which is 10 years. So I guess they have a year left. But just, I hate to talk that much, but I wanted to outline.
A year minus a day. Minus a day. We're closing in on that now.
A lot of residents I'm talking to say they think this was intentional and they just messed up on purpose.
Okay.
Your thoughts?
You just said. A lot of residents have said they thought this was intentional. And I mean, what else can we think? What should we believe? Because it doesn't make any sense. And, you know, and for us to be told justice delayed is not justice denied, we're like, okay, we're going to see how this plays out. But, I mean, absolutely nothing has happened. And then what should we believe? What should we believe? Because otherwise it speaks to just incompetence. So it's either incompetence or on purpose.
Because I spoke with, I've contacted just attorneys. They're not necessarily like, criminal defense attorneys, but just attorneys in general. And I asked, have you ever seen like a new attorney general coming in and like, yeah, maybe she'd fire a couple people.
Right.
But just cleaning house of a whole team and then dropping charges and restarting from scratch. They said, no, I've never seen that. It doesn't make any sense why, if she wanted to get rid of the special prosecutor.
I guess it depends on what your goal is. It might make perfect sense. Because, I keep going back to, it's been a cover-up from the beginning, from the very beginning, and they've tried to keep it a cover-up. This was something that was supposed to get fixed quietly and never get into the media. People were not supposed to know this was going on. And for 18 months, it was successfully covered up. But I just believe deals were made for people to be where they are. And some of that could have been, and nobody's going to be held criminally accountable for this. No one will be held responsible for this. Because like I said, it's either incompetence or on purpose.
Yeah, because based on my reporting, when they fired the original team had basically handed them on kind of like a silver platter. Here's our entire financial investigation. Here's the people we're going after. Here's the evidence. We were close to charging them. And Nestle's prosecutors either didn't know, maybe they were in over their head and didn't know how to deal with a RICO case, or just chose not to follow up. After all, you were the mayor of the city. Let's say they start charging people with financial fraud. I would think the civil settlement goes up a little bit.
Right.
Also, the original prosecution team, myself has reported this and others have confirmed it, they were building a case against the governor, Snyder, for involuntary manslaughter. So how does one set of prosecutors see evidence that could possibly lead to that, but another one charges him with a misdemeanor?
A misdemeanor.
So
$1,000 fine or a year.
And I think this is important if you're watching in East Palestine or Detroit or Jackson, Mississippi. Let's go to Milwaukee has lead problems. Pittsburgh.
Right.
PFAS, those forever chemicals that are all over the country. And maybe you're a little earlier than Flint. Maybe your situation is a couple years in. I firmly believe, and part of why I've stayed on this story is if they get away with it here, then that's the playbook, how they'll get away with it.
That's the playbook.
And I don't even know what questions to ask because it's mind-numbing. You would think, you know how politics is, at least like a low-level lackey would be thrown under the bus.
Somebody.
Or put in prison.
Somebody. But nobody. Nobody. And we've been left to suffer the consequences of what was done to us. But, it's so funny when you talked about things being handed on a silver platter. We handed some things locally to this administration on a silver platter, like being a year ahead of schedule with pipe replacement. And no one is talking about that. And I'm really surprised because we used to have meetings once a month where we had the people from the city, from the state, from the federal government, from the school system, the scientists, the medical community, and we live streamed those meetings so people could hear what was going on and hear us arguing and fighting for what we knew we should be getting. And those were cut out. No one has demanded that at any level of government. No one has demanded that. We handed things on a silver platter around economic development. The city doesn't even have that anymore. It's gone back to, well, they don't call themselves the chamber anymore. We had a deal with Mahindra where we were going to have at the minimum 20,000 new jobs, at the maximum 4,000. That didn't happen. There are a lot of things handed to our government on so many different levels, and we have been failed on every single level.
Let's talk about that local government. To be clear, I don't have evidence that there was any election fraud. There seems to be abnormalities that happened in the last mayor's election. But to be clear, for YouTube purposes, Sheldon Neely is the mayor. He won the election, and we're just looking at the numbers here. So Sheldon Neely, who was initially a Flint city councilman back in the early 2010s, then he became a state senator.
State rep.
State rep.
I'll correct his resume even if he won't.
He was a big booster. Originally, he went around telling people, yeah, we could just drink from the Flint River. But then he was a booster of Flint joining this brand new privatized water pipeline. So he barely beat you in 2019. It was 200 votes.
Correct.
Flint, like many other places, voter turnout is pretty low. It's generally speaking, I would say you don't see that big of a difference if there's a rematch. People that I spoke with before your rematch with Sheldon Neely, I got a feeling that he wasn't so popular here. Mm-hmm. He hadn't done much. Mm-hmm. It seemed like through the back door he was trying to get Flint to join the KWA pipeline. Yes. And again, you barely lost, 200 votes. So I was very surprised. My child had just been born in November last year, so I couldn't really look into it. I was surprised because in the rematch he beat you, it said, by 1,000 mm-hmm. votes. And again, it didn't seem like he was that popular.
Right. As you talk to people, you're trying to find out, well, who voted for him?
So let's talk about that. Obviously, I want to be clear, I don't have evidence, but in your experience, does that make sense that there could be that much of an improvement?
It didn't make sense in my experience, and it didn't make sense in the experience of the people that live here. And it's so funny that you use the word playbook for some other things, because really what people said was that 200 vote, because people wanted me to challenge that. They said that was the playbook that was used this time. And I just listened. I said, oh, okay, this is interesting to me. There were irregularities, like you say, with this last election. How can you determine a governor's race, an attorney general's race, a secretary of state's race, all these statewide elections, and you can't get Flint figured out until 10 o'clock the next day? And that's when we call you all.
That's interesting. If he won by that much, 1,000 votes, why did
it take so long? That's what we wanted to know.
And were you given any answers?
No, and actually, I can't believe the name of that board that is over the elections.
Board of Elections?
No, they have to sign off on everything, okay. But we can call it that. You know who I'm talking about? Yeah. It was. I can't think of their name, but they sign off on it. And so we wanted to find out what the process was. And they said, well, they're going to be meeting. And because we didn't even, when we called over to the county, they didn't realize that there were problems. We found out there were problems and that they were not able to reconcile or get the votes to add up. And we were told that there were different precincts. It was maybe 4 locations, 5 precincts. And so we brought this to them, and they said we weren't even aware of that. And we said, oh, wow, well, that's what we were told. So they were going to look into that. the next, because they were getting ready to start looking at that the next day, and it took 2 weeks, and they were going through, and all kind of irregularities were coming up, where not only could they not get them to reconcile, we heard some of the people that were part of that election group saying, oh, well, we added a name to the voter roll because we couldn't get things to balance, and that's what we were told to do. Excuse me, you did what? And I shared a story with you earlier where a lady came and said she got an absentee ballot for somebody that person never lived there. And the home that was next to her had been torn down about 6 or 7 years before. And she had been living there forever. She was an older lady. And she said, this person didn't live there, and I know that. She said, I know the families that lived there because I've been here all this time. So those kinds of things were happening. I remember we were going around, and there was a house that no one lived in, but yet 5 absentee ballots were assigned to that house. There were those kinds of things going on. One of the people that was part of that election group said that they were over at the Mott voting location, and they were asked to sign off on whatever you do when elections are over. And she said, well, why would we sign off? We still have 4 more hours of voting to go. But somehow it got signed off. One of the guys would not even sign off on the election. He said Flint did not get a fair election. I mean, we watched this on Facebook Live for 2 weeks. It took them before they would certify the election because there were so many irregularities. And here's what was really interesting was, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if it's 56 precincts we have or 57, but half of them you can't even go and do a recount because they weren't sealed appropriately or they didn't have the appropriate signatures. So you can't even go and do a recount? I mean, are you kidding me?
Well, I think because every election has irregularities, it doesn't necessarily amount to enough to sway one way or the other. But what's interesting is Flint, what is the voter turnout? Less than 20%?
Yes.
So 1,000 votes, in most elections is you wouldn't think twice. Like, all right, they won by that much. But in Flint, like that,
you're going to think twice.
You're going to think twice, particularly if it was a nail biter the first time. So you can't really think of like a major accomplishment in the mayor's first term that he would have that kind of improvement over the first time.
Right.
You had,
and he didn't.
Yeah, there was some folks.
I'll say it.
Yeah, there was some folks that weren't high on you, but there was other parts of the community that were. And remembered your time as mayor. So I just don't see anything flashing green light accomplishments that you'd see an increase in turnout for the current mayor, which would also mean or whether it is an increase for him or people flipping from you to vote for him. So, and it also doesn't make sense, like you said, this first I didn't realize that all the other elections were called that night.
Right.
So if he won by 1,000 votes, which is a lot for Flint.
Right. You would have been able to call that.
Right.
You would have been able to call it.
And were you ever given an explanation for why it took that long?
No, they said that's just Flint.
Is it in years past did it take that long?
It never took that long before. It never took that long before. So why now?
Well, the difference between you and him, and this is just a fact, is the current mayor pretty much all along was saying the water is safe. It's a trust issue. We need to regain trust. And you were saying there's still questions about the water.
Exactly.
And there would certainly be politicians and business interests that would not want that.
They didn't want the truth. It's so funny, Jordan. Somebody asked me, what do I wish I had known before I got into office? What do you wish you knew? And I said, I knew this, but I didn't know the extent. I said, I wish I had known that they wanted team players and not truth tellers. And I wasn't on that team. I wasn't going to say the water's good when it's not. I wasn't going to continue with no big contracts and let other people benefit economically off of our crisis. I wasn't going to go along with this water settlement and say that's fine. I wouldn't stop talking about in-home plumbing and appliances and fixtures. I wasn't going to stop because I said, if you want me to stop, then do your jobs and give us what we deserve as a result of what has been done to us at the hands of you people that are in office,
right.
The people that are in office. And I wasn't going to stop saying it. I'm still not going to stop saying it. And that's probably why I'm sitting here and not in City Hall.
Do you think, somebody said to me yesterday, and I've thought this for a while, but I don't use this term lightly, but somebody said it to me yesterday at the 9-year anniversary event. Do you think there's anything to that this is, whether it be environmental or racial, but an environmental genocide?
Yes. And that's what I've talked about. I said, because you have tried to destroy a whole generation. A whole generation. When you let this go on for that amount of time and you don't yell and scream and let people know what to do to protect themselves and to protect their kids. Yes. When you want to pretend that it's over and still not give us what we deserve to even help remediate some of the things. You were talking about, eating the access to the fresh fruits and the produce and all those kinds of things. When you don't try to put those things in place and say everything is good. When you say, oh, we don't need to address what's going on in home, everything is okay. When you do those kinds of things, and we've had children, like you said, we lost lives here. Children lost their caretakers, but that's okay too. And then we're hit by a second public health crisis, a pandemic. Yeah, I do think that, and that's not a narrative people want out there, and that's why really, why we're here, because we weren't able to get this covered by mainstream media. It was like everybody was in this conspiracy together, and so yeah, we do talk about you have destroyed and damaged a generation.
What's interesting, because you mentioned early on that obviously crime is an issue here. The current mayor has talked about it a lot. In Chicago, the mayor-elect who just won ran on a different approach. Let's not, expand the police department. Let's not, measure success by how many bodies we could put in prisons, but let's invest in the communities.
Right.
And here, there's always been crime in Detroit, Flint, and elsewhere. A huge reason for that is lack of financial hope and opportunities.
Right.
But, yeah, if a bunch of children are poisoned, there's plenty of research that heavy metal poisoning will lead to mood problems, violent outbursts, violence, and when they're kids.
Those that have survived, lock them up now. Let's get them out of the picture as well. It's almost like, if you can survive everything that happens here, I guess we'll let you stay.
No shit. If kids are poisoned at 7 or 8, they're going to be lashing out in their teens. The answer seems to be, let's lock them up.
And the thing is, you said something really important to me when you talked about, oh yeah, Flint's always been high in crime, because we had been. Detroit, we were always in the top 5, always most dangerous cities, but we had gotten out of that. We had gotten out of that when I was in office. We were out of the top 20. We were out, but that wasn't put out in the media either. But we were out of the top 20. That was a huge achievement for Flint not to be there. Do you know how excited we were about that? And in fact, Chief Johnson at that point was getting calls from other large cities that had high crime rates saying, what did you do? What are you all doing there? And so now we're right back where we started, maybe worse.
And on the theme of sweeping things, lifting that rug, people should know. And, I don't agree with everything you did, but I certainly think compared to the current mayor, people should know when you were up for re-election against this mayor, there seemed to be a deliberate media blackout.
Yes, there was a deliberate media blackout. I'll tell you, they even blacked out a church newspaper, okay?
Tell people.
I mean, that, which was amazing, and that shows you the power of media. And again, that was why after I was campaigning, when that 810 news media platform was there, I said, oh, no, we've got to keep that, because we didn't have an outlet. There was a newspaper, and it was getting funding from the philanthropic community here in the city of Flint. And
That would be the Mott Foundation.
There you go. And they said that was my paper. You know, that's the mayor's paper, because that was the only place I could get stories out. And they stopped the funding until the week of the election.
Isn't that interesting?
I mean, really?
So the Mott Foundation stopped the funding right before the election.
Until a week. They could not print for some months because they didn't have any money to be able to do it. They got their money back the week of the election. I mean, and we can talk about the money. It was the same thing when we found out, because people kept saying, where'd all the money go? When we found out where all that money went, and we informed the media in August, I had 2 people on social media put it out. The media wouldn't even talk to us about it.
Tell people what you mean when you found out where all the money went.
You know, because people said there's millions and millions of dollars have come into the city of Flint. Well, it didn't come to the city of Flint. It might have gone to the foundation. It went to the community foundation. It would go to the United Way. It would go to the Red Cross. It was going to those kinds of organizations and agencies. So we knew that, but it had to go someplace else too. Where else did it go? Because we knew it didn't come to Flint.
You know, it's interesting. I hate to interrupt you. I just want the audience to understand. This is the level of this cover-up. Under Governor Snyder, there was, I think, $360 million the state assembly earmarked for Flint.
Right.
There was reporting done that showed maybe $20 million went towards Flint water relief. There was money going to the real estate developers, law firms, banks.
Some went to Lansing. I mean, it was just like, where did this money go? And we found out, and we got the report, and we put it out there. And when we finally met with our local media here, it had to be in October. No, let me take that back. They came in August. We put it out in August. They came in September, October. They said it was going to take them 2 weeks to put the story out.
This was in 2019.
Before the election.
2 weeks to do that story?
Yes. Do you know when? Well,
I could do that in 2 hours.
Okay. Well, let me tell you when it got put out. January of 20. And they put it out election night. There was an election going on that day. So they covered it. They buried it while everybody's watching the election results. That story didn't come out until after the election in January of 20. Now, the election was in November of 19. We gave them this in August of 19. They put it out in January of 20.
And obviously, they had no problem. There were accusations against you when you were mayor that you were siphoning off money for a personal fund or this and that. You denied it. They were covering that.
Oh, they covered that. They always covered that.
But as far as I could tell, they never provided evidence to that.
Because there was no evidence to provide. And I told them, I said, how many black people you know in elected office get to steal money and be at home? I mean, really, come on. I said, I haven't been hiding. I said, I'm very vocal. I'm out there. And the FBI came in and did an investigation. They threw it out. A private investigator came in and did an investigation and said nothing has happened. They took it to a federal judge. He said nothing took place. He threw it out. They appealed it. They brought it back on something. I said, let's go to jury. I went to federal court with a jury for 2 weeks, and it was a unanimous decision. But they covered all of that. But you never heard them say they found nothing, that she didn't do anything. I said, so, they cover what they want to cover, and they don't cover what they are told not to cover.
As we wind down, I want to ask some bread and table issues, because the more residents I talk to, this is still one of the poorest cities in America. You got inflation on top of that. Residents are having to pay for still contaminated water the highest water rates in America. The added expense for those that can afford it to buy bottled water.
Right.
You got mothers using 15, 20 bottles of water to bathe their babies. So the expense of the monthly water bill for contaminated water they can't safely drink. The expense of buying bottled water. The expense, inflation driving prices up. automation is taking away jobs in some parts of everywhere. How do people afford to live?
Right.
I mean,
Not
there
very well.
are some parts of Flint that are better off. Right.
Yeah, and just like when we first started, you were talking about people's homes. There are some people that have new homes, and so the in-home infrastructure is not an issue. So they have access to clean water. So there are some, but that's the question: how do people live? And we haven't gotten a dime for anything. The water stations didn't stay open. There are ARPA funds that are there to help people that has not, they haven't gotten to the people.
What's ARPA?
That was the money from the federal government. And it hasn't gotten to the people. I mean, it just makes no sense. It makes no sense. And that was why I was always big on where there's crisis, there's opportunity, and there's economic opportunity, and we want to make sure people from Flint have access to those opportunities, and that's what we were doing then, and that's been taken away. That has been taken away. And by the way, we left about $23 million in surplus when I was out of office that Neely said he found it. Well, you don't find what's already there because it was there, and I left it in a letter as I was leaving office. And that money was to be used. I said one of the things we want to make sure we do with this money is give people some more water credits so they don't have that burden of paying for that. We were looking at a tiered water payment system when I was in office. That ask me where that is. I have no clue. So a lot of things that we had put in place, ask me about public health. We go from a water crisis to COVID, and public health has been dismantled from the city. You talk about economic opportunities, and we don't have an economic development department for the city anymore. So all of those things that had been put in place so we wouldn't be in this position have been dismantled, and that's what's happened.
You know, federal government is very powerful.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of President Biden. It doesn't matter to me whether you are or not. There was a lot of talk from Democrats as they ran for office, senators, Congress, president, environmental justice, social justice. They like to show up to churches during election time. I would think that the federal government, if they looked at the extraordinary circumstances here, in terms of, I don't know if it's even legally possible, but it looks like incompetent legal representation. Because there are standards for if your attorney is incompetent or you don't get the right legal advice or whatever, that, you know, certain things could be thrown out or you could get a retrial. Would you like to see the federal government take a look at Flint and say, you know what, maybe we need to talk to the state of Michigan about changing these statute of limitations specifically towards this case, or restarting or going back to the first set of investigators? Would you like the federal government to do something where it's not just hopeless and nobody could be charged? And not only that, but you would think as part of that infrastructure deal, they could allot a certain amount to finish the pipe replacement here, to give money towards interior plumbing in Flint. Everywhere deserves it.
Everywhere deserves it.
But would you like to see the federal government?
You know I would. And why not? Yes. That's what we deserve. You know, I mean, you talk about wanting to give people hope. Those are the kinds of things that give people hope. When you see those people in those positions saying, wait a minute, something is terribly wrong. Something terribly wrong was done to the people of Flint, and something terribly wrong has continued to stay in place, where we haven't gotten the things around justice for the people here. That would be wonderful. Will it happen?
My last question, you know, obviously you're the former mayor, but you're basically an activist now. You've been going.
I was one before.
You've been going to Jackson to try and help with their crisis, which the media don't cover that anymore either. What's your message to people who might be watching from East Palestine or Jackson, Mississippi, or name your community, whether it's a new issue or an old issue? I hate to say it this way, but what's your message to them so that they don't end up 9 years later
still in this position. You know, one of the things I told people this before I got in office, while I was in office, and I continue to say this, is never underestimate the power of your voice. You need to speak up and speak out. I remember when people said, what can you do any differently than the previous mayor, because we were under an emergency manager? I said, I'm going to use my voice. I said, I will be in front. And you remember at first the media was there. I said, I will be in front of them every day talking about what's going on in Flint. And I'll also be saying, here's what needs to happen. They won't let me do it. I said, because we need to know the news, whether it's good news or bad news, it's our news. And that worked. We were able to galvanize and come together, and that's what I want other people to know. You don't have to accept what's there. You don't have to accept these outdated standards where you say 15 parts per billion. Oh, wow. Well, now in Michigan it's going to go down to 12, and I can't remember what the year is, and we think that's good. I mean, I guess 12 is less than 15, but we had to come together and make that happen. It was activists. You know, we talked about the cancer cluster study. Even though we had started in office, and Art and some of the other activists continued to take that message out there, we can make things happen, but we've got to come together. And that's why I've been going around talking, because I said we've got to connect the dots, because these things aren't happening by accident. These aren't coincidences. I said, and so we need to connect these dots, because when we come together, we're a stronger, more powerful group, and that's what we need to do. I mean, how good was that for me to be there and saying, this is the same guy that told us the same thing, it meets the standards. That's unacceptable, because the standards are unacceptable. They're old, they're outdated, they're antiquated. And so, but had I not been, they don't know this man, you know, they don't know he was here. They don't know he was here. They don't know that's the same person that told us the same thing he just told you. And so we've got to come together, and we've got to, like I said, we've got to connect those dots for people and say, not only do you need to fix Flint, we're not going to let this happen here. Here's what we're going to demand. And we can do those things. But I also tell people, you better look at who you put in office. You better look at who you put in office, because that's really important.
And my actual last question, I promise. If you had been the governor of Michigan, let's say instead of Rick Snyder, it was Rachel Snyder, and you presided over whether you just were asleep at the switch or you were actively covering it up. Let's say, for argument's sake, it was true, and you as Governor Snyder, what he's saying is true. I wasn't informed how serious it was. They didn't bring it to me. I was told about the Legionnaires too late. We know all that is not true. But let's say it was. And you were the governor when this happened. Do you actually think, a female black woman, that you would have been charged with basically a parking ticket and the charges then dismissed? You think...
Not at all.
Would they hold you accountable?
They would hold me accountable, because they held me accountable for things that I couldn't even be held accountable for. So yes, they would have held me accountable. And let's say that it went that way, then there should have been some people fired. If this level, I mean, if all that was going on and no one had the decency, you didn't think it was your responsibility to inform me of that, and people are losing their lives and kids are being damaged, you need to be fired. And I would have been very vocal about that. So, but no, it wouldn't have happened, because they'd have thrown me under the jail.
You think because you're a woman, black?
Both. Both.
You think Governor Snyder got away with murder?
You know what? That's so funny, because that's one of the things I always said was how to get away with murder. Right here in the city of Flint. And that's what happened, yes.
Thank you for taking so much time.
Look,
Mayor Weaver's also doing radio nowadays.
We're thankful that you are still coming and helping us keep this story out. I mean, this is ridiculous that we're not talking about this, that this isn't plastered over the news right here.
I'll tell you something else, not to make this about me, but you should know how it is from my side. My child was born in November, and I didn't really take like a paternity leave. I just said, you know what? I'm going to be there for my kid. I'm not going to do this job for a few weeks. And in that short time, I'm going to start writing this book that I've been procrastinating on.
Okay.
I never had time to write about Flint because of my day job. So I started writing, and I just started writing. And before you know it, I had 7, 8 chapters done. So I started, a viewer of Status Coup, might be viewing now, had some publishing experience. So she started helping me with editing it and getting together a book proposal and pitching it out. Literally, I've been told by agents and publishers, I think this is some of the best reporting I've ever seen, but we don't think for a book that this is commercially viable. So I asked, what does that mean, commercially viable? Because I know at least the people, when they find out about it, people certainly would pay whatever. I don't even care about the money, just to get it out there. So one of them, I said, can you just dumb that down? You think people don't give a shit? You said it. That's what he said to me. You said it. So I got offered by a small publisher, which I might go with, but most of the agents and one publisher said to me, I think your reporting is amazing, but we basically don't think there's enough of a market. I said, well, there's been other Flint books, and they seem to sell good, but this one in particular, which outlines the cover-up.
Now, who doesn't want to hear about that?
True crime is a very popular genre.
It sure is.
So it's amazing, and I could go into stories about media editors. Hell, the Detroit Free Press during COVID, the beginning of it. I drove to Michigan. I met with the number 2 editor in a parking lot. We rolled down our windows because COVID was in the beginning. I won't get into details, but I basically handed it to him, what I had. And this included the governor, his chief of staff, the health director, their flurry of phone calls that prosecutors had concluded. He said to me, this is damn good work. I said to him, because I know how these outlets work, throw your reporter's name on it and put me second, because they would want to take credit.
Right.
Because for me, people would know that it was me.
Right.
But I basically said, I'll take second fiddle. He said, I'm inclined that we're going to do this and do this with you. Let me go back to my editor-in-chief, I think, Jim Schaefer with the Detroit Free Press. 3 days later, I don't think we have the resources to, at this time, we don't have the resources to invest in this. So I wrote back, aren't you the biggest newspaper in Michigan? You told me that your investigative team has 6 people on it. I've done the story already. They don't want to do it. So something is going on with the media, too, in terms of a cover-up.
Exactly, all over, and that is, and that was why I said, okay, meet me here, because we had to come up with our own media. We had to come up with our own platform right here in Flint. I mean, when you can't get something out about your own city right here, that was why we did 810 News Media. That's why I'm so thankful that you're here. I mean, because 19 trips.
I went to, me and my former partner, Jen, we literally went to the Flint Journal, literally. Opened the door, we were banging on the door. Jen created a packet to dumb it down for them. Hey, we just broke this story. It was in The Intercept. They deleted their phones. They deleted their text messages. There's also other stuff in the story about the governor refusing to hand over documents. Here's a packet. Are you going to report on it? The guy looks at me like a deer in the headlights. Oh, we're going to take a look at this.
I know. I think I had to have you come on the radio to talk about that because nobody was getting this story.
And they wouldn't report it.
So
that's the sad state of affairs. I would tell you maybe 90% of Flint is not aware of the things I've broken and they were broken in Vice, Intercept, national outlets, but they're not aware of it because the media they consume is the Flint Journal or local TV.
Right.
And those outlets blacked it out.
They blacked it out.
So... yeah, I'm going to continue fighting, I guess.
Thank you.
Maybe I'm naive, but I think if a community, I don't care if it's black, white, purple, if they're poisoned and there's a cover-up and then they're left to slowly die. Somebody said that to me yesterday. They want us to die quietly.
Right.
I don't think that should just fade into...
It should not. It should not. So thank you for helping us keep it alive. And thank you for knowing that Flint lives matter. We appreciate it so much, and we appreciate what you've done for us.
Absolutely. And I think that, no politician is perfect. I think most of them are corrupt. But a lot of people would have just faded into the ether. But you're not going down to Jackson for your health.
No.
You're still fighting the fight here. So not that anybody's perfect, and I'm sure there's, valid criticisms of some things you did as mayor. But it sure seems like you're doing more than the current mayor. I mean, he wasn't even there yesterday at the 9-year event. What was he, in Florida?
That's what I've heard.
So the current mayor your job as mayor should probably be to put your face on the anniversary of one of the biggest disasters in the city's history. He wasn't even there yesterday, so.
No.
Thank you guys for watching. Please support us. It is not cheap to keep coming back to Flint. We're also going to Kalamazoo, Michigan. I don't know if you know that story. A paper mill is releasing toxic gas into a poor black community in Kalamazoo, and people are getting sick there. So we're going to be going there in the next few days. I got some other interviews I'm going to be doing here in Flint. But honestly, a big reason why I've been able to break these stories is coming here. Because you don't get this kind of information just they don't fax it to you. You got to build sources and relationships, and coming here so many times is how we've been able to break not just the stories that were published, in these other outlets, but the smaller stories about struggle. Hell, it's a scandal. Just the interview we just did, how this gentleman at Legionnaires and the CDC calls, and he tells them, we're not using the AC, and I shower 4 times a day. That should have triggered an investigation. Maybe you have a Legionnaires outbreak in Flint again. CDC did nothing. I wouldn't have known that unless I came here and interviewed him. So thank you guys. You could support this work. StatusCoup.com/join. Become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Because as you're seeing now, the only way you could really build legitimate, independent, people-powered media is if everybody chips in to build it. Right. In our case, the flights, hotels, rent-a-car, going to Kalamazoo next. Lewis is going back to East Palestine next week. These trips, between it all, cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and then you have to throw in equipment. So if we were getting money from some of these foundations, that I wouldn't take their money, we'd be set. But we don't take money from the foundations or the railroad companies blowing up towns. We take money from actual viewers. So sign up if you can, StatusCoup.com/join. If you're already a member, you could chip in just to donate to this specific trip. That's StatusCoup.com/donate. Any amount you could do. And if you can't do any of that, just share this content, spread it around, family, friends. Tell them and ask them, do you know that this situation is still going on nearly a decade later? I bet you if you send this video to 10 friends or family, 9 out of 10 will be shocked. I guarantee you. Because everyone in my life, my family, friends, they're shocked every time I send them my work. Oh, you're going back to Flint? That's still not fixed? Because we all live in bubbles, and we just think common sense. Of course they would try to help the people. Unfortunately not. So thank you for watching. Again.